until one day somebody gave me a tube of the Daniel Smith Mayan Blue, and then I was wrecked. I couldn't make the praying watercolor do the things I wanted them to do, like the way that the Daniel Smith worked. So I became one of these guys who would save every nickel and dime he could possibly find to buy his next tube of paint. So you can imagine what happened when one day I got a phone call from Catherine Taylor, who's the president at Daniel Smith. And she gave me a call and said, "Hey, how would you like to be our sales rep?" And I said, "Well, sure," because in the back of my mind, I was kind of thinking somebody was pranking me because they knew how much I liked Daniel Smith. So she asked me, "Hey, can we send you some samples?" And I said, "Sure, send me some samples." And she said, "Well, what can we send you?" And I said, "Well, send them all to me. Send every color you make to me. I got to have them all." And she said, "Well, we'll start with 12, and then we'll start to make our way out from there." So anyway, so I've been working with Daniel Smith now for 5 years now, and I have had the pleasure of working with artists like you in many different places around the U.S. Pre-COVID, of course, but now since we are in the situation that we are, I've been continuing to do my lectures and demos over Zoom. So just wanted to welcome you all. I want you all to be able to ask questions at various points. Tara is going to be keeping an eye on the chat for me, as well as maybe asking some questions on her own if she desires so. But first things first, I want to go ahead and get into, I'm just going to share my screen here for a second so you can see what I see. And I'm just going to give you some background on Daniel Smith, who we are, and kind of how we got our start. So it all started actually in 1976 with this man right here, Mr. Daniel Smith. He got his start in the art materials industry in 1976 at the University of Washington in Seattle. And his first job there was working in the department where they printed the school newspaper. And one day they were all standing around the printing press kind of lamenting about how terrible the printmaking ink was, and if it was possible for someone to create a better one. So it kind of went all around the room, and then it came to Daniel Smith, and Dan said, "Well, sure, I'll give it a shot." So he went ahead and found the best black pigment he can find and the best oil-based binder. Brought those ingredients back to his parents' basement in Seattle, Washington, where he brought his first batch of paint to the school and took it to the printing press. And then all of a sudden, it was actually the ink that he'd produced was a lot better than what they were using. So it didn't take long for the school art department to hear about this wonderful black ink and decided they would like to use it for themselves. So Dan went ahead and produced a batch for them, and they came back and said, "Well, hey, why don't you make this in color?" So he came back and made it in about 5 or 6 other colors and brought it back to the school. And it went so well that the students at the school were actually selling the ink outside of campus. And he was having to fill a lot of orders. And it got to the point where he had to quit his job at the school printing press just to keep up with the orders from the art department. So from that point forward, Daniel Smith became a paint manufacturer. Here's kind of an early look. Here's kind of an early look at the process. That's Dan actually sitting at the mill there, and that mill was actually his first big investment in equipment. And to do it, he had to sell his beloved motorcycle. All right, so just to kind of get into a little bit more about our philosophy. So one of the things that Dan really wanted to do in 1993 was develop watercolor. So his issue was that he didn't really know how to do it. So he went basically to all of the big watercolor events like Fabriano in Italy and some of the others in the Philippines and China, where he talked with artists about what the paint should look like and how it should perform. And so he did that, and he went back to Seattle, took all of the information that he was given, and produced a palette of 18 colors and brought it back out to these watercolor events. And lo and behold, it did really well. He was selling so much, in fact, that by 1998, it allowed him to go ahead and move into kind of the second phase of his dream about watercolor. And that was to incorporate history into his line of colors. So he looked to the ancient peoples. So if you look down there on the bottom of page 2, you see where it says ancient peoples. And he looked at all of these civilizations to see what they had to offer in terms of minerals or rocks being used as pigment. So, for instance, he looked at the Plains Indians, and they had turquoise. And the Plains Indians would go ahead and take turquoise and then grind this very finely and mix it with animal fat, and this became their war paint. Another example was we had lapis lazuli from the Egyptian civilization, where they used lapis for a lot of different things, not only for paint to express themselves, but they also used it for clothing dye and also for jewelry. And if you were wearing this color, you were generally thought of as more of the affluent kind. So this color was very prominent during the times of the Egyptians. So we have all of these wonderful examples throughout history where we have minerals or rocks being used as paint. So the problem that Dan had, though, was he wanted to do this, but the methods that the ancient civilizations used would not work in today's world, simply because he couldn't produce it in large enough quantities to be able to make it worth his while. So he had to come up with a new sort of manufacturing process that would allow him to take something as big as a boulder, really, but turn it into something that's as tiny as a half a grain of sand, but still not lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral or the characteristics about the mineral. So it took some time, but he eventually figured it out, and he called that process PrimaTek, which is short for primitive technology. So what I'm showing you here on page 3 is kind of the flow chart and how we do it. And then in the other pages here, as we go through them, we'll get into that in a lot of details. So it all starts with this guy named Bruce. This guy, Bruce, has been with us for a very long time. He's been with us for over 30 years now. And his job is he gets to travel the world and work with all of our mine owners to be able to procure all of our minerals. So when he buys mineral, he buys it in really, really huge quantities. He buys it in basically boulder size, which in his mind, he's trying to equate that to 15 years worth of product. So why would we want to buy product in such large amounts? Anybody?
Consistency.
Consistency in color is number 1. We want to be able to keep the color consistent. What's number 2?
Freight cost.
Cost, yeah. So what happens when we go to Costco? We generally get a better price because we buy in bulk. Same thing here. And then the third thing is it's just a plain old availability, and that matters more to our partners like Plaza. It wouldn't be very good for us to be able to basically have a fill rate where we're only able to fulfill, a small percentage of the product at a time. So having a good fill rate and enough product on hand to make sure we don't run out helps make sure that Plaza's shelves stay full. So those are the 3 reasons why we buy in such large quantities. All right. So when we're ready to make basically a production run, we'll take that boulder size piece and then we'll break off a piece about this size, about the size of a watermelon. And what we'll do is we'll put it in that jaw mill, and that jaw mill puts gentle pressure on the mineral and causes it to break in smaller pieces. So basically, it'll take that big piece of mineral, that watermelon-sized piece of mineral, and it'll break it down into pieces that are about this size. So basically about the size of a softball. And we'll probably get about 10 to 12 pieces this size of usable product out of that watermelon-sized piece of mineral. From there, we go to the next mill, which is what we call our hammer mill. Whoops, actually wrong one. That's not what I wanted to do. Do that. And we take it to the hammer mill. I need to go back over here. There we go. To the hammer mill, which actually looks like this. So basically, it's a spinning blade that eats away the part of the mineral that we can't use. So I'm going to show you this here. And this is actually a piece of lapis, raw piece of lapis. And if you can see all of this gray right here, this is all product that we can't use. So we have to figure out a way to remove that. So that hammer mill with that spinning blade eats away all of the product that we can't use. And generally speaking, when we're done putting the product through the hammer mill, we're generally left with pieces that are this size. So remember, we started with something that was watermelon size, and then we went to a softball size. Now we're down to this size. So something very big, progressively getting very small. So once we get it to that size, then we come back over here and we put it in the what we call our ball mill. So what's interesting about that ball mill is that it's a spinning cylinder, kind of like your clothes dryer. And then we load the small little marble-sized pieces on the sides. There's two places where we can enter them. And then once they drop in there, they crash against about 1,000 different ball bearings, making the mineral actually very, very, very small. Basically, it makes it what we call 40 microns small. So micron is a measurement. So to kind of put that in perspective, if you were to pick up a sheet of paper, just an ordinary 20-pound sheet of piece of paper, that is going to be 80 microns. This is 40 microns. So this is literally half the thickness of that sheet of paper. Your hair, by the way, is 70 microns. So this is very, 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 very small. So even though we make it that small, we don't lose what's interesting and valuable about the mineral. So like in the case of zoisite here, this is the color zoisite, it's all of this beautiful granulation. So to me, that's kind of where the miracle is in all of this. And how do we make something so big, so small, but not lose what's interesting and valuable about it? Does anybody have any questions?
You've got music on.
All right. All right, we'll keep going.
Oh, that's my alarm.
All right, so now that we have the mineral down to the size that we want it, we bring all of our ingredients together. So what you see there at the top there, where it says to a mixing vessel, these are the things that we mix all of our ingredients in. So we have the pigment or the mineral, we have gum arabic, and then we have distilled water. So interesting question is, why do we use distilled water versus tap water? What could be in tap water that we don't want?
Minerals.
Yeah, if you have hard water, what's generally, when we talk about hard water, what's in hard water?
Salt.
Calcium.
Calcium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else is in there? What else is in there that we may not like?
Pollutants. Chlorine.
Chlorine, yeah. That doesn't sound wonderful for making paint with. Anything else?
Fluoride.
Yeah, fluoride. So all of these things are in tap water, which for us is kind of an issue because we want to make our process as simple as possible. So, and to do that, we have to eliminate what the variables can be. So minerals and like calcium and chemicals like fluoride and chlorine, these are all things that add variables to our paint making process, and those are things that we like to eliminate. So the nice thing, you know, with distilled water is that it doesn't have all of those other particulates in it. So what that means is that all of those paint particles are closer together, and it makes the paint look a little bit more vibrant. When you have those contaminants in the water, they push the paint particles away, which makes your paint look slightly less vibrant. So am I saying that everybody needs to go and buy distilled water and only paint with that? No, not necessarily. If it creates the desired look that you like and you're happy with the results, then stick with tap water. All right, so once we have those three ingredients, we take it down to our mixing station. So that piece of equipment there is actually much larger than it appears. When we decide to use that machine gets raised up 16 feet tall, and it creates a huge amount of torque, which creates what we call a Venturi effect as it's churning the paint. So basically what it is it's drawing air into the paint. And when it does that, it creates static electricity, and it causes the paint particles to want to tangle. So you kind of see that down there on the bottom of page 6 where it says particle agglomerate. So particle agglomerate, all that really means is that all the particles are tangled. So what's bad about that, or what you would notice as an artist, is if we stopped at this point, and you put your brush into that bucket of paint, what you'll see is that some portions of your stroke will look fine, but then others will look dull. And the dullness is what happens when those particles are tangled. What we want them to look like is what you see at the bottom, where you see all of those circles side by side, spread out linearly. And then the arrows is representative of light and what light does when it goes into the particle and then it bounces back out. So we want to make sure that all of those rays of light are angled in such a way that they're in unison. So the way we do that is by breaking up those agglomerates and use a mill, which is what we call a dispersion mill. So it looks like that. So a dispersion mill is probably the most common piece of paint making equipment you'll see in the paint making industry. And the way that it works is that you have 3 different cylinders, and then the cylinders are all spinning in opposite directions of each other. So when the paint comes over the top of the first one and then it hits the second, it's literally like a train wreck. And what ends up happening is that the paint particles are going to get ripped apart, so that the gum arabic and the distilled water can get in between each of the paint particles. And then by the time it hits the third, the same thing happens all over again, and rips them apart once more. And then it makes sure that we have all of the binder, which is the gum arabic and the distilled water, and it makes sure that we have all of the particles kind of spread out linearly with those 2 products in between them. And when that happens, the paint looks a lot more vibrant and consistent. So here's a couple of pictures of what that looks like. Actually, I have some pictures of what it looks like in the factory. So this is this triangular part here. This is what we call the apron. And the paint starts on the far end down there and glides and goes across those 3 cylinders, and then comes down that chute there and ends up in that bucket that you see right there. So that big bucket next to the machine operator, it literally drops into that. And then at that point, our chemist comes along with a paintbrush, and then he paints out the line, paints out a stroke, and he's able to tell if the paint looks right or not. So if the paint looks right, then he moves it on to the next part of the process. You guys are very quiet tonight. Has everyone had their coffee? Feel free. This is for you. Go ahead and ask questions. It's going to be.
I had a question about the gum arabic. Is
good.
Is there any issues with getting a hold of it these days, given the rise of demand in watercolors and that being the medium?
No, not that we have seen right now.
Because it only comes from one region, right?
Comes from India, from the acacia tree.
Yeah.
So not so far. I think the biggest challenges that we've seen with COVID actually has been transportation. Actually, we're starting to see some of that now.
Scott, why do some manufacturers use honey?
It's just a preference. They like the characteristics of using honey versus gum arabic. There's really no right or wrong answer there. My only thing would be to caution you on mixing colors that have two different binders.
Yeah, good point.
Mm-hmm.
The honey ones stay moist in your palette.
Yeah, they don't dry.
The one thing that I would say though with ours is ours easily re-wet even after they're dry. That's one of the things that we've been known for many years, is how easily our colors will re-wet. So don't be fearful if our paint dries in your palette. Just add a little bit of water.
I like to make my own pans, so I don't like the honey because I don't want it when I go out sketching with watercolor palette. It's the honey is it won't dry, so it's a problem.
Yeah. And the wonderful thing with materials, with the materials that we have, is that it really gives us an opportunity to develop some preferences. So some people really love using honey, or using brands that have honey as a binder. We just found that for our purposes that we like the consistency of gum arabic. Plus, it gives you, the artist, a lot of options in working with other or combining other manufacturers to be able to choose color with, because we're as artists, we all love the idea of being able to choose the colors that talk to us the most, or the ones that we love the most. And it's as long as the binders are the same, you could use a Winsor Newton color, you could use a Daniel Smith color. Basically any other manufacturer that uses a gum arabic as a binder, you have the ability to go ahead and integrate into your palette without issues.
I have a quick question. With your PrimaTek paints with the various minerals, what percentage of your paints has the actual, stone in it? You know what I mean? Is it like 50%? And then you have water and gum arabic. Is it 80%? How pure of that? Is that, see what I'm known as?
Yeah. But that gets into kind of like the if I told you that I have to kill you sort of thing. So,
well, okay. And I'll pass on that.
No, yeah, Daniel Smith holds that kind of information very, very close, because we, while we love being in this wonderful environment of artists and and art manufacturers, there's still quite a bit of competition out there for us. So we definitely try and hold on to that information as closely as we can.
Yes, that's the secret sauce.
That's the secret sauce. You got it. All right. So now that we have the paint to the consistency and the vibrancy that we want, we take it to our tube filling station. So what we do is, I'm going to bail out of here so you can see this. So what ends up happening is that we have a carousel, and we have our tubes kind of upside down like this with the caps already on. And as the tube is going by, it comes to the applicator, which inserts the right amount of paint into the tube. And then on the way out, it crimps the tube and also stamps a number across it. So that number on the crease of the tube is what we call our batch number. And that batch number corresponds with what we call our paint outs. So internally, that's what we call these. We call these paint outs. But on the back side, what we'll end up doing is that we'll put like a really big label on the back. And on the back of that, it will have everything that we need to know about that batch of paint, the precise amounts of the product that we use, who was working that day, the temperature and the humidity, basically anything and everything that we would need to know if we had to go back and research something about the outcome of the paint. So let's say, for example, you have a tube of Sleeping Beauty Turquoise and you really loved it, and you went through it and you bought another tube and you noticed that something was different about it, but the color wasn't the same. So what you could do is you could take those two batch numbers, give Daniel Smith a call in customer service, give them those two batch numbers, and then they would pull out the two paint outs and they would put them side by side, and they would say to you one of two things. So they might just say, hey, you have something there. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. But 99.9% of the time, they're probably going to say something like this. Was your water clean? Or was your brush clean when you did that? And then most people go, well, I don't know. So, but we hold on to, we've held on to all of this information for basically 40 years now, so that when an artist has a question, they should never feel intimidated about giving our customer service a call and asking a question. That's what they're there for. But that's the reason why we put batch numbers on the creases of all of our tubes. All right.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are there, and I apologize, I joined 20 minutes late, so if you already answered that's fine. So with the water thing, so and I'm kind of a beginner, so I still haven't figured a lot of stuff out. But so like, I know you can have hard water and soft water, and that has to do with like the minerals and whatever else is in your water. Can that have a heavy impact on certain paint colors or paint in general?
Well, it's, one of the things that we're constantly looking at is how the environment affects the vibrancy of our colors. And one of the things that we noticed was that when we use tap water versus using distilled water in the paint making process, that the distilled water looks slightly more vibrant, and that's because those particulates like calcium and fluoride and chlorine, those all have, that's all stuff that ends up taking up space in the solution of the water. So when you have more stuff in the solution of the water, it pushes the paint particles further away. So when that happens, it makes the paint look slightly less vibrant. Now, does that mean you as artists should do it? That's up to you. Some people don't really mind it. It doesn't they can't necessarily discern a difference, but some people like to try and keep their work as pure as possible, and using distilled water allows them to do that.
Interesting. Thanks.
You're welcome. All right. So let's get to it here because time's getting away from me. Okay. All right. So let's chat about lightfastness for a moment. What does lightfastness mean? So lightfastness is the pigment's ability to resist light over a period of time. So we've had different technologies over the years, but the latest technology that's being used is this machine here that's called a xenon phaedometer. So that's kind of what it looks like on the outside. This is what it looks like on the inside. So basically what it is that you have a carousel that has all of your paint outs. And then down the center there, you kind of see a rod, and then it looks clear in the middle. And then it picks up with metal again. Now that middle part is actually a light bulb that projects a very, very, very bright amount of light. Basically, it it's able to replicate over 120 years worth of light exposure in 4 days. So think about that. So that's 120 times 365, but we're able to replicate that in 4 days. So this machine actually gets very, very, very hot. And if we didn't put distilled water down the center of that bulb, the whole machine would melt. So what ends up happening is that at the end of the 4 days there, we take those paint outs out and put them next to a template. And then that helps us determine what the light fastness is of each of our colors. So, and we're very lucky to have one of these actually in our facility, because most manufacturers have to send out for this process. And sometimes it can take 6 to 9 months. Whereas Daniel Smith can go from concept to production to testing in 45 days. So it's a huge advantage for us to have this piece of equipment, because it allows us to get not only to make sure that our paints are light fast to really to the point to, to where we reference them, but it's also gives us a lot of flexibility when we bring new colors to market. All right. So photo spectrometer. So this is how we make sure that our colors are consistent. So you see the little black, it looks like a black handle there. If you pull that black handle down towards you, what you would see is a glass window. And then you put a sample or a piece of our paint out in that window there, and then push that handle back up. And then that machine will chemically break down the composition of the color that's on that paint out. And it's able to detect minor differences in the colors themselves. So basically what this does is it helps us make sure that our colors have continuity from batch to batch to batch. That's kind of a color matching system. All right, granulation is one of my favorites. So I'm going to get out of here for a second, and I'm going to show you one of my favorite colors, which is this guy right here. This is a color called green apatite. And green apatite has this effect that we call granulation. So what granulation is, it's when the pigment or the mineral is heavier than the distilled water that it sits in. It wants to go and flow then down through all of the tooth of the paper, and it creates that textured look that we see here. So all of this it happens naturally. We don't add anything to the paint for it to do that. So the big question is, what is it about granulation that's so great? Well, to me, what's great about it is the fact that because it granulates, it does a much better job of being a descriptor of what nature can do than I can with a brush or a pen. So even though we're able to do quite a bit of things with a brush, if I'm really looking for something, make something look natural, I'm looking at a color that granulates, because it does a much better job of articulating what nature can do, because the pigment is doing what it wants to do naturally, and it creates that natural textured look. All right.
I have a question. Are there any tips to getting more granulation out of the paint, like using more water, less water, different types of paper?
Paper is a great conversation to have. So tell me this, do you think we would get more granulation or less granulation out of hot press?
Less.
Less, right, because? No
valleys.
Right, it doesn't have as many nooks and crannies. It's pretty smooth, and there's a reason for that. So if you were to go to a paper mill, the paper would kind of come down this conveyor belt, and then it would come to a big steel cylinder that's hot, and the paper goes underneath. Now, because the cylinder is made out of steel, it doesn't have much texture. So as the paper goes by, the cylinder, it leaves that texture on the paper as it goes by. Now, what's different between hot press and cold press is that you take out that cylinder, and you put a contraption that comes down that has what we call a felt. And the felt is very similar to a blanket. And then when the felt comes down, it leaves an impression on the paper. So depending upon how much texture that felt has determines whether that paper is cold press or rough. So if you want to see more granulation, you're going to use a paper that has more texture. So answer to your question is, there's the easiest way to get more granulation is to look at the paper you're using. So
doesn't Daniel Smith do, don't they have a granulating medium?
No. We don't put anything into our paint to make it granulate.
I don't mean that in the paint, but don't you have a medium?
No,
isolated medium?
No, Winsor Newton does.
Okay, I know I have seen it. I didn't know who had it.
Yeah.
So I love green apatite. It's one of my favorite colors. But I also have another color that I think is a Daniel Smith color that's almost as fun. It's called Lunar Blue.
Oh, Lunar Blue. Yes.
Daniel Smith color.
I love using Lunar Black quite a bit also.
Yeah.
I'm not trying
Scott, I have a question.
Sure.
Who gets the naming rights on these pigments?
Good question. So let me put it to you this way. So if it's a single pigment color, we're going to stick with the historical name. If it's a two pigment solution, we'll probably still stick with the historical name. But if generally what happens when you get out to a third pigment, like we do with some of our colors, we can name it whatever we want. So, but there's also some science behind it too. So this is Sleeping Beauty Turquoise.
Gorgeous.
So we're not trying our best to steal from Walt Disney, but this actually comes from the Sleeping Beauty mine, which is in Arizona. So, and we have a number of minerals. Here's another turquoise. This is the Kingman green turquoise. This is the color that it makes, but this comes from the Kingman mine, and this makes the Kingman green turquoise color. So it makes this color. So depending upon, a lot of times we'll name the color depending upon where we find it. All right, let's get back to it.
Well, did you find the moon, the lunar blue somewhere special?
No, lunar blue is a synthetic color that because there is really nothing else like it out in the market, we were able to kind of name it on our own.
Moonglow, that's a pretty famous color.
Moonglow is a very interesting color, just a little side note. So Moonglow was actually an oops color. So we didn't intend to make that color at all. So wow. our chemist had a long weekend. He's never admitted to or what from, but he made a mistake on the amount of one of the pigments he was adding. And even though it didn't make the color that he originally intended to make, they decided to keep it, and therefore they decided to call it Moonglow.
I love that color.
All right, let's talk about quinacridone. Quinacridone is really fun. I love quinacridone colors. I don't know about you all, but I think we need more of them, and we have more than anybody else. So we have a total of 14. I wish I had them all here, but here are a few. I'm gonna go ahead and jump out of this for a second. Actually, let's stay here for a second. So let me give you some background on what quinacridone is. That's what everybody really wants to know at the end of the day is what the heck is quinacridone? So let's break down what quinacridone means. So what does quin mean in Latin?
4. 5.
No.
5.
5, very good. So cridone in Latin cridone is rings in Latin. So this is where we get the name quinacridone. So it's 5 rings, and you see the kind of the way it's laid out in its composition there at the top. Okay, so that's where we get the name from. It was discovered in the 1890s by a German chemist, but it didn't become really prominent until the 1950s when it was produced by none other than the DuPont Paint Corporation. So, and it was created, these quinacridone colors were actually created for the automotive industry. So whether you all know it or not, 99.9% of the colors that we have to play with as artists actually came as a result of the automotive industry wanting that color first. So let's do a little bit of trivia here. What do you think are the top 3 industries that use pigment? I gave you one already.
Textiles.
You said
no.
cars. Cars is the
yeah, I said cars.
Textiles.
And
industry?
Like clothing, textiles, blankets.
Home improvement?
No, because most of the time we're using dyes in with textiles.
Well,
cosmetics.
Currency?
No.
Not anymore.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. House paint is number 3. Very good. Are you ready to give up what number 2 is?
Nail polish?
Nope. How about plastics?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, of course. Oh.
Plastics. So, and this was kind of a mind blower for me the first time I heard it. Only 0.1% of the actual pigment that is produced is for us to use as artists.
Wow. Yeah, I know about that.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? So what is it that we really like about quinacridone colors? I mean, I'll just tell you from my point of view, I love just the diversity of color that we have from these. We can get the purples, we can get the oranges, and it's just amazing how vibrant and beautiful these colors are. And what's really interesting to me, who's kind of somewhat of a chemistry geek, is that all of these paint particles, they are all the same size, the same shape, and the same weight. So each one of those particles is exactly the same. So think about this for a minute. We don't see any granulation in this at all, right? If you do see granulation, it's caused by the texture that's caused by the paper. But the reason for that is because those paint particles are all the same size, same shape, same weight. They come together almost like a jigsaw puzzle where all of the pieces are exactly the same. So they come together very seamlessly, and that's why we don't have granulation. Other things that I really love about them is how light fast they are. These colors are so light fast that they're actually off the chart in terms of light fastness. We don't have a test that accurately determines how light fast they are. They are so far off of the end of the chart. Something else fun.
Isn't it true that everybody's beloved Quinacridone Gold ran out because they stopped using it for car paint or something?
Very good. Yes, that's absolutely true. And in I guess that was in the year 2000, John Cogley, the current owner of Daniel Smith, went ahead and he found the last remaining lot of the single pigment PO48. Yeah, 48.
And it's all gone now, right?
And it's all gone. Yeah, it finally went away in 2017. So what's really interesting about that story, I've been on board with Daniel Smith for about for 5 years now. We had been using that dual pigment formulation for Quin Gold in our 5 mil tubes. And do you know how many people came up to me and said, I see a difference between the 15 mil Quin Gold and the 5 mil Quin Gold? Want to know how many people? 0. If you're looking for it, you'll find it. But if you're not looking for it, it's very hard to pick up. The only difference I see from the old to the new is actually just what it looks like wet, but it blends almost exactly the same, which is really good because we certainly can't find any more of that product anywhere.
So Scott,
All right.
I'm not going to understand that because the automotive industry is no longer making that quinacridone gold or whatever you guys were talking about, that it's not available to the art industry because we're only 1%. So,
right.
Is this being determined that by the other industries? It's something that.
Yep, okay. we are at the mercy of larger industries. That's for sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, particle size. I'm going to go ahead and do something a little bit different here. I'm going to get out of this because I want to show you all something. I'm going to change my camera around. So I'm showing you two different colors. So this color here, this one, this is French Ultramarine. This color is Ultramarine Blue. If you look on our color chart, they are exactly the same pigment. They have the same characteristics, but yet the colors look a little bit different. So what's different here is that the particle sizes are different. We are able to take pigment and grind it down even further to be able to create different results. So think for a moment, what happens when you put vegetables in a blender? What happens the longer you leave the vegetables in the blender? What happens to the color?
It goes gray.
Yeah, it gets lighter generally. So depending upon how we decide to work with the particles, helps, it's able to give us or it gives us the opportunity to change the color a little bit. So this is French Ultramarine. Now, French Ultramarine, the size of its particles is 10 microns. So it's a bigger chunk than the Ultra. And when you have a bigger chunk, you see more granulation. And because the chunks are bigger, you also kind of understand why this color is just slightly warmer than the Ultra. So I'll put them side by side here again. So here's the French, here's the Ultra.
I mean, even from this camera, it's clearly more granular. And on my palette, I only ever use French because I love the granular.
So by changing the particle size, we can actually change what the colors actually look like, even though it comes from the exact same pigment. Pretty cool. All right, I'm gonna get back out of here. Go back in. And I'm gonna flip this around. There we go. All right, so here's just kind of a look at that's just a look at our quinacridone colors and kind of the range that we have. I kind of love these swatches because it really kind of does a good job of articulating exactly what the colors kind of look like versus kind of what we have to look at on a color chart or a computer screen, but this is actually a representation of what the colors actually look like.
So pretty.
All right. Do you guys have any questions about the process itself? All right. So let's look at some of these minerals that we actually use. So that first one up there is a mineral that we call Amazonite. And it's a very interesting one. I'll go ahead and do this because I think it's fun to show. So this is Amazonite right here. And what's really interesting about Amazonite is that you could put this mineral on the hood of your car in August and you'll pick it up and it'll feel ice cold. For some reason, this mineral always feels kind of chilly almost. And in the Amazon, the indigenous would actually use Amazonite to help heal their sick because they thought the coolness, because it was so kind of strange in a way, that they would rest these on their sick and it would help them to feel better. But it produces a really beautiful color. This is it here. So it's a really pretty turquoise. All right. Okay. All right, so just others that I'm just gonna kind of zoom through. Amethyst, we actually use real amethyst, and we get our amethyst from Brazil. So it's just, I have a few little chunks here that if you're looking at me on the side, you see that. I have them in a couple different sizes. And what's really beautiful is that the amethyst actually has a little bit of shimmer to it, because it has a little bit of mica in it. So when you use amethyst, it actually even has just a little bit of mica associated with it. So you actually get a little bit of shimmer out of it too. All right, Bloodstone. Yeah, this is Bloodstone. This is Bloodstone here. And Bloodstone is really interesting. Bloodstone's found in different parts of the world, but it was found in also in Israel. And they found this mineral near the area where Jesus Christ was crucified. So based upon that, the findings or the, where they found this, this mineral was called Bloodstone because they thought this is some of the minerals that were around the area where Christ was crucified. Pretty interesting.
Is that a PrimaTek color?
Yes, it is. Everything I'm showing you is a PrimaTek color. Okay. You got it. I'll show you. I've kind of showed you zoisite, but one of the things that I didn't mention about zoisite is, can you all kind of see that that reddish stuff in here? Those are rubies, actually. Wow. So rubies actually come from zoisite, and the rubies are processed out of that. But zoisite, as a mineral, is really, or as a pigment, is really beautiful. Heavily granulating. This thing's a granulating monster.
I have a question for you with regards to the minerals. So if I think about oils and the great masters, they painted with various minerals like the Egyptians and etc. So when they restore oils, you've got these masters that go in and they take the varnish off and they touch up and they fix. Can you do that with watercolor? Because I can't imagine that
watercolor is very difficult in that sense. If you come back in, most watercolor is able to be reactivated with moisture. So it's a very, very, very delicate process. Most people who are looking to preserve their watercolor will, the easiest thing to do is to put it behind glass. And deal with that, it that way. Oils, especially when you varnish over that, that creates a very durable protectant over the top of the paint. So it's very different than watercolor in terms of preservation. All right, we need to get to the color chart, so let's do that. I'm gonna jump back here, and then we're gonna go to the color chart. There we go. Oops. So here's what our color chart looks like. And basically we kind of show you just what we offer here. And then when you look on the inside, this is kind of the layout. So what you see here, these are the general and the synthetic colors. So the synthetic and some of the natural colors. So when I say natural, though, I'm not referring to minerals. What I'm referring to is colors that are like ochres and siennas and other colors that do come from the ground, but are not mineral based. So to find our PrimaTek colors, you would flip it over onto the back, and you would see there at the top where it says PrimaTek. And this is where we put all of our mineral-based colors. Down below it, go ahead.
Scott, when I came to the Seattle store and I wanted to purchase a color chart, they said they didn't have any of these. Is it possible to purchase one of these?
Oh, there's if you would go ahead and just put your information into the chat, then one of the wonderful people at Plaza will get you one.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, they're absolutely available, and we want to get as many out there as we possibly can. All right, so down below the PrimaTek colors, we have our luminescent colors. So these colors are either interference, iridescence, or what we call duochrome. So here is just kind of an idea. I always get questions about what are duochrome colors. So duochrome colors produce this sort of effect. So on the left there, you see what the color looks like on white paper. And then on to the right there, you see what it looks like on black watercolor ground or black watercolor paper. So it's dramatically different. So in the way that this is done is that they coat the mica, and depending upon to the depth in which they coat the mica determines what the color we see is on the dark side. So these colors change depending upon the perspective in which you have. So the other question I get a lot is, what's the difference between iridescent and interference pigments? This is just kind of handy stuff. Iridescent colors, it's basically a reflection. So it's like a mirror. So basically, particles of light hits the paint pigment matrix and bounces back, much like a mirror. Now, an interference colors is different, much different. So basically, instead of reflecting light, it refracts light. So when we mean refract light, it changes the trajectory of the ray of light. Now, when it changes that trajectory, our eye determines or sees a different color. So what that means is, so the particle of light enters the paint pigment matrix and then scatters the light. So when it scatters the light, then that's what happens when our eye sees a different color. Our duochrome, go ahead.
One of the problems with the effects of these colors is that these days for competitions, they ask for JPEGs, and a photograph does not show the effects of.
Yes, you're correct. You're correct. It is very difficult. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't blend these colors with others to create some different effects also. Matter of fact, that's how I suggest most of these colors be used, not so much as standalone colors, but have the courage to blend them with other colors you work with and enjoy the results.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so if you were to flip back
Scott,
to that
real quick.
Go ahead.
Sorry, real quick. I just want to let everybody know that was asking for color charts in the chat. I put my email address in the chat. It'd be easiest if you could just email me directly and I'll make sure to get those out to you. So my email address is twalsh, TWALSH @plazaart.com. And I also put it in the chat for you. Please provide your full mailing address and we'll make sure to get those out to you. Thank you so much. Thanks, Scott.
Color chart. This is kind of what you see. It's right next to the word watercolor. So where it says color information, that's just letting you know that all of this information is going to flow from left to right. And then the next piece of info there is really the format of what each of these colors come in. So either it's going to come in a 15 mil tube, which is this large tube that you see there, a 5 mil tube, which is that skinny tube down a little bit further, a watercolor stick, and or half pan. So those are the 4 formats that each of our colors can come in. So not all of our colors are available in all 3 of these or 4 of these. So we tell you which one or which format on the color chart they're available in. So one thing that everybody always has questions about is our watercolor stick. And the watercolor stick is a blend of the pigment or mineral with gum arabic, and that's it. So we don't add the distilled water. We don't add any sort of wax to them. So what these are is a very concentrated stick of color. So, and what's really nice about these is if any of you have ever traveled on planes with tubes of paint, you know how much fun that is when you go to open your tubes. You hear this fun little pop, and then you got paint all over your hands. So what's nice about the watercolor sticks is that they're dry, and you can either just take a chunk of these and put them in a half pan, or you can take the stick itself and then paint and take a brush and then paint directly from the stick. So these sticks are really concentrated. They're basically the equivalent of 3 full pans of watercolor.
Why is it that so many retailers don't carry them? I haven't found one brick and mortar that carries these.
Well, to be honest, they're a bit of an acquired taste. I'll just say, you know, it's they certainly have their uses. It's just and typically in the past, and it's probably our part, we just haven't done a good enough job explaining what they can do.
It'd be great if Daniel Smith had these in half sticks, because they're quite pricey, right?
They're around $15 for a stick, which actually is pretty economical for how long they last.
Yeah, but if you're trying to get a set, you know, like a starter set, it would be nice to have half sticks. You see that a lot in pastels.
Yeah, I'll have to pass that along. You know, we haven't invested in sets and in the sticks as much as we have with, say, our
I'm just telling you, for me, it's a price issue. Not that I don't think it's a good value, but I don't really want to buy 1 or 2 sticks and then the rest watercolor. If I'm using the watercolor sticks, I'm probably just taking them out. And I love the idea of them for on location sketching, but I want my whole selection that I want, and to buy those sticks in that size are kind of prohibitive. They kind of defeat the purpose of agile sketching.
Right. I understand.
Do they behave the same way? I mean, the same color and wet, and they dry, and you can rewet it and everything.
They have the same pigment ratio as the tubes of paint.
Yeah, they're a great idea. They're just not portable enough.
You only need 6 colors, you know, to go sketching.
Well, you might, but I don't.
all right. I got to reel you guys back in here. You guys are like, you're trying to keep you guys together is like trying to herd cats. So let's get going here. All right, so here's a look at our half pans. So maybe the half pans is probably something that makes some sense or more sense for some of you. We now have these in 45 open stock colors. So here might be the answer to your dilemma. So the way we do this is a little bit differently. We do these in pours. So the reason why we do it in 3 different steps is that we want to properly evacuate all of the moisture that happens when we produce these. So they're actually quite time consuming, and we're one of the few manufacturers that actually does these by hand. All right, so those are the formats that each of the colors can come in. So the next piece of information we give you is the light fastness rating. So we have a Roman numeral 1 through 4 system here. So 1, if you see a 1, that means that color has excellent light fastness. And last, we'll have a light fastness rating beyond 100 years. A Roman number 2 is good for 100 years. A 3 is what we would consider to be fair, which is 50 to 70. And any color for us that begins to shift within the 15 to 20 years, we consider to be a fugitive color.
When they shift, do they get lighter, or do they just change their hue?
So think about what happens with opera pink, for example. What happens to opera pink when it fades? It gets to be really, really pink, right? So there's another color out there that we probably all have used at one point, but is fugitive also. Did you guys know that Alizarin Crimson is a fugitive color?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Even though it's you know, that was our middle of the road red. Pretty interesting.
That's why all the old paintings, the faces are blue.
Yeah.
They're using fugitive colors.
Exactly. So that's how we rate the light fastness on all of our colors. So it's that 1 through 4 system. So the next piece of info we give you is whether the color is non-staining or staining. So we use a 1 through 4 system. So here is a little look at when we talk about staining, what does that mean? So at the very top there, you have cobalt violet. And cobalt violet is a 1. It's a non-staining color. So you could see that white stripe that goes through the entire picture there. So it's nearly completely white through the cobalt violet. So that color is a good example of what happens when you use a non-staining color. So, and why is that important for us? Well, we like to be able to do different techniques. And one of them is we like to use stippling or lifting techniques. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to do a lifting technique if you can't actually lift the color. So here we kind of go through the system. So you see the next color, which is that Hansa yellow medium. That's a low staining color. So you can kind of see what happens with that when we apply that same sort of test. And then Indanthrone blue is a 3, and that's a medium staining color. And then carmine, which you can hardly see, we were able to get that stripe through. That's a high staining color. So all of this really gives you an idea of the sort of techniques that you can get away with using this particular color.
Is that on the tube? Is that marked on the tube?
Yeah.
I don't think it's on the tube, but it's definitely on the color chart. Oh,
okay. I want a color chart then.
All right. So go ahead and put your name and address and all that stuff.
Email me.
Tara.
I will.
All right. So next thing is granulation. So we want, and not everybody, you know, there are people out there that don't want their colors to granulate. So we tell you which colors granulate, yes or no. Transparency is really a big one. So tell me this, everyone. What happens when you blend a transparent color with an opaque color? Whose nature does it want to take on?
Opaque.
Right, and wouldn't you like to have known that before you blended those two colors together? So understanding transparency helps you to better formulate kind of what your plan of attack is in your work. So if you're going to be working with a transparent color and you blend it with an opaque color, you know that you're going to lose some of those transparent characteristics. So we give you a system there so that fully open circle is transparent, that half circle is semi-transparent, and that dark circle is opaque. So, and based upon that, that's great information for you to have, especially when you are looking at blending colors. So kind of to illustrate that, well, that's granulation. Here, this is transparency. So look at the color at the top. So you see that the left side, like on that quinacridone burnt orange, it's a transparent color. So when it goes over the top of the black, looks to be black watercolor ground or black gesso, you don't see that color at all. Now, you look at the semi-transparent, which is that half circle, and you see that in the black there, you start to see some of that orange, though it's not very dominant. And then down below, you have a fully opaque color, and that green is able to cover the vast majority of that black. So that's kind of a good illustration as to what the transparency, or the way that we measure transparency. All right, so let's see if you got the color chart. So this is our good friend Ultramarine Blue, and if you were to look on our color chart, this is what you would see. So go ahead and give me the first piece of information that we give you there. How about you, Marty?
It's excellent light fast.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. What it comes available in?
You got it. So it's available in yeah, that's the first piece of info. So it's available in a 15 mil tube, a 5 mil tube, a watercolor stick, and a half pan. So, all right, so what's next?
Lightfastness.
Yes, very good, Kath. Appreciate that. So yes, excellent light fastness. What's the number 3?
Granulation.
No. Try again.
She's staining?
Yes, it's a medium staining color. All right, next is the granulation.
That's right. I was number 3 is why. Okay.
You got it. All right, and then that open circle means what?
Transparent.
Fully transparent. Very good. Have you all ever wondered what these numbers underneath all the colors mean?
Yeah, the pigments.
Yeah, this is the detail on the pigment. So there's an international system that's used in order to classify color. So, and the way that it works is that P always stands for pigment. The second letter always is from the family, the color family that it comes from. So what does the B mean?
Blue.
Blue. And that 29 means that this is the 29th shade of blue. So if you were to go to a pigment manufacturer and go to their showroom, they would hand you a big book, and then the first page would be extremely, extremely dark, and that would be shade number 1. So this is the 29th shade. All right, you guys have any questions about the color chart? Actually, I'm gonna get out of here.
A related question, Scott.
Yes.
A number of your colors are more than a single pigment. There are two pigments. So
yes.
That creates a problem when one is color mixing.
Well, here's what I'll tell you about that. So when we blend our pigments together, we blend them when they're dry. We don't blend them when they're wet. And when we do that, static electricity forms between each of the pigment particles, causes them to bond together, and then we add the distilled water. And when that happens, the pigments or the colors actually perform more like a single pigment.
So shouldn't get grays and shouldn't get dirty grays if I mix two Daniel Smith.
And that also has to do with the quality of pigments, whether the pigments have a lot of filler in them. Our pigments are generally pretty pure, which is kind of how one of the reasons or one of the ways we position ourselves as an artist grade watercolor, because we use very little to no fillers in our paint. And it's usually the fillers that cause the paint to muddy.
Okay. Another question also on the half pan. What I've been doing is buying Daniel Smith tube paint and filling my travel palette half pans with that. Should I do it in stages like your 3-pour system, or?
I don't necessarily. Okay. I don't necessarily think you need to do that. You know, simply because how concentrated the paint is. You don't go through a lot of paint. With us, because our colors are so concentrated. So I don't think that's necessary to do it in stages.
Thank you.
All right, well, I wanted to kind of brush out a few colors here and have so that you can all see them. I'm gonna go ahead and flip my camera around so you can kind of see what I'm doing with my hands. And I'm gonna show you some of these PrimaTek colors. So the first one I'm going to show you is Kingman Green Turquoise, and it's Sleeping Beauty gets all of the headlines, but in my way of thinking, I love Kingman Green Turquoise just as much. It is a sweet color. Go ahead. I usually like to work a little wet so that the paint flows a little bit better. And today I'm using Arch's 140-pound cold press. And I just love the kind of the texture of the Arch and the texture that it has. And it really works well, I think really works well with our colors, especially the ones that granulate, because it has such nice texture. I'm gonna go ahead and lift this up a little bit so you all can see it. So this is Kingman Green Turquoise.
Can you show us comparison side by side with the Sleeping Beauty Turquoise?
Yeah, I can certainly do that. I have that right here. What's really interesting is that the mines actually between Kingman and where Sleeping Beauty Turquoise is from, they're literally under 100 miles away from each other. This is the Sleeping Beauty Turquoise. So the Sleeping Beauty has a lot more blue associated with it.
Yeah, good for seawater.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's look at, we're gonna look at green apatite. This is probably one of my favorite colors for landscape. Sometimes I bounce between green apatite and serpentine for my color for leaves and foliage. But I love the intensity of green apatite. It is a powerful green that, think about it as more like a granulating deep sap green. And it has a very, very dark mass tone, but as you hit it with more water, what you start to notice is that it has all of these different browns that are actually associated with it, and it kind of really adds some beautiful texture. All right, so let's look at, I want to look at Mayan Blue. I love Mayan Blue. So this is the color that kind of made me fall in love with Daniel Smith all of those years ago. As soon as I can put my hand on it, there it is. I really love Mayan Blue because not only because it just creates like an kind of an ocean, deep ocean or moody ocean look, but it also blends well with other colors like Quinacridone Gold. Quinacridone Gold is the color that I love to blend with the most. I actually have a nickname for Quinacridone Gold. I call it secret sauce because it doesn't matter what I blend it with. It makes everything good. All right, so this is Mayan Blue. And it is a really deep granulating blue. That's really pretty handy for using for lakes and seas and ocean.
What's called Mayan Blue? M-I-N-E.
Mayan Blue, and a little bit of story about Mayan Blue. We actually purchase it from a pigment manufacturer who makes it the same way that the Mayans did. So basically, the Mayans would make this color by mixing clay and indigo. So, and we still use that same formulation today. So I'm going to show you just because I brought it up, I'm going to show you what Quin Gold looks like when it's blended with this.
Which green was that again?
Mayan apatite.
Mayan Blue, the green, green apatite.
What makes you like that better than Cascade? I love Cascade.
Cascade has a lot of blue in it for me.
Yes.
And that's, and for me, I don't know about you all, I have a trouble painting any other season but fall. I can't seem to get spring right.
But if you're painting a blue spruce, it's perfect. It's gorgeous.
I agree. So here's kind of what Mayan Blue and what you can get from Quin Blue, or excuse me, from Quin Gold and Mayan Blue. So one of the things that I really like is this whole interaction here.
So Scott, Scott, this is Kath. Is that the Quin Gold that we can't get anymore?
Well, let me, okay, so we still have Quin Gold, but we had to change the formulation of it. So originally Quin Gold was a single pigment formulation. And when we ran out of that single pigment that was used for it, we had to go to a 2 pigment solution in order to have it be a color match.
Okay, I feel better now.
So I find that Quin Gold is a very aggressive color. It will push other colors away. Does the single pigment versus the double pigment act the same way in that manner?
Yeah, it's still a pretty aggressive pigment. I would agree.
All right. Use it is to wash it way down. Makes the most beautiful pale yellow that just glows.
I agree. It is absolutely beautiful. It has a lot of different uses too. All right, so let's take a look at, we're gonna take a look at Lapis. Lapis we'll do next. Now, Lapis is depending on your point of view, either something really fabulous or it could be a little bit of a disappointment, but it's all about in the way that you use it. So if you're trying to create beautiful skies, Lapis is your guy because it creates some really beautiful sky blues. If you're thinking that the color is going to be like the mass tone, which let me show you here, right here. Oops, there you go. It's very different compared to what it actually produces. So it's a beautiful color, but it also depends on on your usage of it and how you want to use it.
I appreciate you saying that because I have a tube of Lapis and I was disappointed. So I was wondering if it was something I was doing wrong or I just have different expectations.
Well, now that you, one of the other things that I would really recommend you all do is pick up one of our 238 color dot cards. And that dot card is really a great way to try color before you actually buy it. Oh, look at that. Thank you very much.
Love it.
That dot card is wonderful because it allows you to try the color before you actually buy it. All right, Serpentine. We're going to do Serpentine next. And Serpentine, I kind of bounce between Serpentine and Green Apatite. They both can produce similar effects in my mind, but sometimes I really think Serpentine can lend itself towards more spring because it has it has kind of almost a green gold-ish type of tone to it where you get a lot of underlying yellows. There we go. There it is. And just like I said before, I mean, Quin Gold and any of our greens, I really think makes some pretty interesting blends. So I'll take a little bit of that Quin Gold and I'll work it in here so you can kind of see what it does. But that Quin Gold is definitely kind of like what we talked about. It's a very strong pigment, and it does a lot of interesting and different things. So to me, I always love the surprise that I find usually when I work Quin Gold into either blues or some of the greens that I work with. So when I'm thinking about fall and when I'm thinking about fall foliage, I love it. I bounce between that Green Apatite and Serpentine. Okay, I'm going to show you this color. Actually, I'm gonna move away from the PrimaTek colors, and I'm going to show you some of our other synthetic ones because I think they're pretty awesome too.
Pyrroline colors synthetic?
The PrimaTek colors are not synthetic. They're made from mineral, so they're genuine.
The pyrroline or pyrroline green. And
pyrroline is a synthetic, yeah. So I'm going to show you Prussian Blue. Now, I know some of you say, Prussian Blue. I really love our Prussian Blue. I think our Prussian Blue is actually a little bit different than some of the other paint manufacturers I've seen, where I feel it's more vibrant. I may be wrong, I may be biased, but I really love Prussian Blue. But it's this really lush, beautiful, deep blue. And then if you take it.
So how does the Prussian Blue compare to the indigo?
It's not as granulating, and it actually has more intensity. The Prussian is definitely more intense.
Well, what about to the Ultramarine?
It's a little cooler than the Ultramarine, and okay. It doesn't. And the Ultramarine has slightly more granulation.
So the Prussian Blue is a combination then color. It's got another mixture in it. If you were to go to the pigments being used,
black, right?
Well, we can take a look and see. Actually, that I can't do. So somebody who has, does anybody have a color chart out there?
I have the dots.
I don't know that the dots won't have the pigment information, I don't think.
Nope.
I have the color chart. I'm looking it up.
Yeah, I have
a
tube.
All right, so let's find Prussian Blue for me.
It's PB 27.
Yeah.
There you go. So it's a single pigment blue.
What about indigo?
The color indigo itself, I believe that might be 2 pigments, because I don't know that we're using the natural version of that. I think we're using the synthetic of it.
The indigo has 2 different.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it says PB60 and PBK6.
Yep,
so Scott, are we dealing with this because we're now dealing with the Prussian Blue is now synthetic versus dealing with the mineral pigment? Is that
right? Yeah, I'm drawing a distinction there.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So here's what Prussian Blue does with Quin Gold. So I love all of the beautiful exchange there between the Prussian Blue and the Quin Gold. I love seeing those greens and the complexity of the color. All right. Well, I'm going to do one more because I know it's Friday night and you all are probably ready for a glass of wine like I am. All right. So why don't let's do kind of I'll do a color that probably none of you have ever heard of, but I think it's really beautiful. And it is called Naphthamide Maroon. And it's got a really ugly name, but it's a very pretty color. All right. Oops. Gotta get that brush cleaned up.
So I had the dot card about 3 or 4 years ago. Has it changed?
Not the 238. We have a 66 color dot card. And that one's changed a little bit. We've added some of our newer colors, but the 238 color dot card is still the same.
Okay, thank you.
So that's Naphthamide Maroon. It's this beautiful, almost burgundy color, and it's very powerful and beautiful.
That's a core color on my palette.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we have hit, well, that's 7:30 your time. So I'm done painting. I'll hang around for a few minutes if you all have some more questions. And I'm just going to go ahead and flip my camera around here so you all can see me. There we go. You guys have any questions?
I have a quick question, Scott. Oh, sorry.
You go ahead. You go ahead.
I was actually wondering about a pigment you didn't mention. I had been reading recently about actually a new blue pigment, the Kingman Blue.
I've been reading about it as well.
Yeah. Jackson's already got us all. Sorry, Plaza. I was just wondering if that was anything that you know, Daniel Smith would be investigating or putting out anything with that pigment.
Well, I've requested, let me put it this way, I've requested that they comment on it, but I haven't heard yet. Now, the only manufacturer that I know of that's using that pigment right now is Golden.
Okay.
What's the name?
It's extremely expensive.
Yeah, I got that impression.
What's the name of the color?
For some reason, it's escaping me right now, but it's not something that will stick in your brain very easily.
It's Blue.
Yes, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like a combination of what was it? Yttrium, indium, and magnesium, which I have probably butchered completely saying. So.
Me too. All right.
Is
who else there?
Scott, is Daniel Smith making pastels? I mean, is he?
No, we're not making pastels. So let me put it this way. Daniel Smith is a very small company. Mm-hmm. So including the sales reps, we're talking 35 people.
Ooh.
And 24 of those people make up production.
Mm-hmm. Scott, may I oh, sorry.
But we're able to make 5,000 tubes a day.
Wonderful. Scott, may I make a comment, please?
Sure.
I'd like to thank Plaza for giving us this opportunity and also mention that one of Plaza's assistants in the Bethesda, Maryland outlet, Ed Morris, is a fabulous ambassador for Daniel Smith.
Yes, he is, and he's a good friend of mine. And there's not enough paint that I could send to my good friend Ed.
That's right.
We all love Ed very much.
Scott, this is Rosie. I have a question. I just recently purchased Perylene Maroon, Perylene Red, and Perylene Green. What does Perylene mean?
Perylene is the structure, the chemical structure that it's based on. So just like we talked about quinacridone and what makes quinacridone, it's actually the chemical base in which the color is made from.
Is that the same with ferrule?
No.
Is that the same with what? Sorry.
Peril. I don't know how to say. I'm sorry. I'm butchering it.
Perylene?
Is it no, Pyrr.
Pyrrole.
Pyrrole.
Yes, pyrrole is the chemical compound in which they base the color on. It's like the building blocks of the color.
Hey, Scott, I have a quick question. Sure. I know some people answered it in the chat, but what's better, you think, taking the color from the tube and putting a little bit into the half pan, or actually buying the little half pans if you wanted to add color to your palette?
They're exactly, the only thing that we do differently with the half pan is that we add something to it to make it a little bit more buttery. Okay. But beyond that, the color intensity, the pigment load, it's the gum arabic and distilled water, it's all the same. It's just they add a little something extra to the half pans to make it a little bit more buttery.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, can you talk about reds and the light fastness of your reds?
Well, we have a couple different reds, and one of the comments that I get a lot is, what about, do you have a permanent version of Alizarin Crimson? And we do, except that we use 3 pigments to kind of synthesize what the single pigment looks like. So, and in return, when you use that permanent version, you get something that's light fast. If you're asking me, for alternatives to if you're asking for alternatives to Alizarin Crimson, I think we have several others that are kind of within that range, but are light fast. So like I said, we have the permanent Alizarin Crimson, but there's also anthraquinoid red, which is also a great kind of middle of the road color if you're searching for kind of a middle of the road red to work with.
What's the name of the red that is the equivalent for the Alizarin Crimson, the one that you said had 3 pigments in it?
That's Alizarin Crimson. Alizarin Crimson permanent.
Oh, okay.
Or permanent Alizarin Crimson.
Okay.
All right. Hey, I love these comments about supporting small business. I think that's
right.
Great.
It's making me in my heart, more. I'm like, oh, I love you.
Yes.
We appreciate all of you, but this is really great.
All right. Well, I am going to leave everyone to their weekend. I sincerely hope that everyone stays safe, not only from the weather, but this crazy virus, and hopefully sometime soon I'll be able to see you all at the stores when I can do this in person again. But in the meantime, thank you so much on behalf of Daniel Smith and me personally. It was a great time tonight.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Scott.
Many your friends.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Thank you, Scott.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.